This is the first episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a podcast where me, Kenneth Arthur, and Rob Staten of Seahawks Draft Blog will be talking about all sorts of things, but all of them leading up to the 2016 NFL Draft. Every week, we will get together and sort of talk about what's going on in college football, how that relates to the upcoming draft, guys' stock going up and down, obviously going into the Senior Bowl and the Combine, and just having a place where we can sort of see how it progresses and how a mock draft and a real draft are created over the process of, the next 8 months. So right now is the first episode, and I guess we'll just get started with talking about who we are, in case you don't know. I'm simply a NFL writer with field goals and freelancing for Rolling Stone and AV Club and Sports on Earth. And just an NFL fan and I've always been a huge draft fan, but I don't know very much about college football, which is great because that way I can be the idiot, whereas Rob can be the expert. And I'll play the part of the person listening to this that doesn't know anything about what's going on in college football. Rob, what was your background in getting into football specifically? What drew you to the draft and evaluating prospects?
So I used to live in Vancouver and had a chance to go to Seattle a few times. And one of the times we were there, we went to a Mariners game. They lost 10-0, by the way, to the Blue Jays that day. So nothing's changed there.
Yeah.
And we were walking past what was Quest Field at the time. And we said, I really want to go and see a game there. And I'd had an interest in the NFL, but never any reason to follow a specific team. So we made sure we went back. It happened to be a Monday night football against Green Bay. It was snowing. I've got a really good story with that because my now wife came with me to the game, and I'd bought the tickets, and it said row SR on the ticket. So we went all the way. We went into the stadium, went all the way to the back row, and we saw row RR. We saw row SS, but no row SR. So we went to one of the steward guys and said, well, where's row SR? And they kind of looked at us like, I have no idea. There is no row SR. Spoke to another steward and they said, SR stands for standing room only. So the CenturyLink Field, there were just basically numbers on the floor around the stadium. And we were basically pointed to two numbers that were for us to stand in during the game.
No way.
So it was the game when the snow hit, and obviously Brett Favre was there, and Seattle won the game. But it was incredibly cold. I've got a couple of pictures of my wife just stood there in the snow, freezing to death.
I can't believe you actually, and after that, you actually had a good experience with football. I would have surprised that you wouldn't have walked away forever.
She was ready to walk away after 10 minutes. 4 hours in the snow later, she was sick to death of it. But we walked home, having stood up for the whole game in the snow, and I was just hooked immediately, and it was an incredible experience. And I try and go back as often as possible. It seems like every time I go to Seattle now, they lose, so I'm going to try and stay away this year. But maybe go to a road game. Maybe they change the look a little bit this time.
Yeah. And how did you go from Seattle? Like, was it because you were a Seahawks fan and then you started getting interested in their draft, and then you just were like, I just love the draft overall, and so that's why you started watching all these prospects, because you would start out wanting them to be on the Seahawks, but then you just also sort of had to look at all of them?
I guess the main reason was that I was a young journalist who had finished university and got a journalism degree, and I wanted to have a reason to write every day. And although I was going to go into broadcasting and I really wanted to work in radio and TV, I wanted to write every day, because if a writing opportunity came up, I didn't want to go somewhere having not got into the habit of writing. So I found blogs were new. This is back in the day when Twitter didn't exist and stuff like this. Blogs were really a new sort of fad. And I sort of was really interested in a blog called Seahawk Addicts at the time. Mm-hmm. And then just one thing I noticed, that there wasn't really anybody talking about the draft apart from Rob Ragg, who was writing a bit for CBS, but there was not that sort of daily fix for a Seahawks draft focus. And because the Seahawks were picking 4th overall that year, it seemed like there was a lot of good debate to have because they were going to end up picking one of the top players in the draft, and I got hooked doing it. People started to read it, and that was good. And then it just sort of, a lot of local journalists helped us sort of get the message out there initially, and then it's kind of taken off. And I just enjoy writing about it so much that it's just become part of like my life now. So I can't imagine not doing the blog.
So obviously the Seahawks, nobody really expects them to get a high pick next year, which is a good thing. But since this is really not so much a Seahawks thing, that we will obviously divert there a lot, but on a general NFL draft thing. So I think a lot of people will be interested right at the top of the draft. So who are some of the candidates in college football this year to be the number one pick next year?
I think everybody expects that Joey Bosa is going to have a great year and be in the running to go number one overall. But it's been quite an interesting summer for him. He's the defensive end at Ohio State. And he's been in trouble a couple of times now with the police. And people are just starting to doubt, what's going on here? This is a guy who is expected to be the number one overall pick, or at least be a top 3 pick, and he's getting into trouble. And it does become an issue because when you've got so much to lose at that point, why is he putting himself in this kind of situation, given what he's achieved on the field? So that is there's a few red flags starting to emerge there with him. And that is something to continue to monitor. Ohio State have had a few guys over the years who have had all the talent in the world, but I've just had those few flags there. So is that going to
like theft related or drinking related? What sort of?
Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's not, it's not domestic violence or anything like that. So it's not no reason to overreact to this point, but just a couple of things that teams are going to look into, and that is something we didn't imagine we were going to have to keep an eye on with him this year. So while he's going to be talented, I think he's suspended for the first game as a consequence of one of these issues. So that's something to monitor with him. If we're talking about quarterbacks, I don't think it's going to be. Someone has to emerge from this group to have a chance to go first overall. So if you're a team, and many have taken quarterbacks early over the years, there's maybe not many left like this. But if you are a team that is looking for a quarterback, there is not an obvious candidate to go in the top 5. A lot of people like Christian Hackenberg, who seems to be living off reputation before he went to Penn State more than anything else. If you actually watch his tape last year, very toolsy, but just error prone, completely error prone. He's had a bad situation at Penn State, of course. We all know what's happened there, and the change of Bill O'Brien going, new coach now, not the easiest situation for him. And then just to throw a couple of other names out, Cardale Jones at Ohio State. This is a guy who's tweeting before he got the job, why do I have to do class? I'm a football player, which is not, it's one of those little things that teams who want in a franchise dedicated quarterback are not, they're not keen to see. And then you also have to wonder why it took him so long to start there. It was right into the playoffs. So and then there's Jared Goff, who's another one who's much liked, but he's rail thin, Kenny. And I don't know, there's just something there that he's going to have to add weight, and he's going to have to get beyond sort of that spread system if he's going to have any chance to go as an early pick.
So what is the situation at quarterback for Ohio State right now? I know that it was going to be the big 3-way competition, but I have no idea where they're at now.
It looks like Cardale Jones is going to get that job. JT Barrett is still in the running. Braxton Miller, I think, is converting to wide receiver. So Cardale Jones essentially has got the inside track on that, and so he should. The way that he played in the playoffs, he helped win them the playoff title alongside Zeke Elliott, of course, and his quality as a running back. But he deserves the chance to start this year, and really impressive. And look, if he can put another really consistent year and be a Heisman contender, then he's got a chance to go very early. He's big, he can move, he's accurate, or at least we saw what we saw in limited tape. He's done it against the big teams in the big moments. So a big year for him, a real opportunity. He's one who could emerge, Kenny, but I don't like the look of this. I would much rather, let's see how Vernon Adams works out at Oregon. Let's see if Cody Kessler can take a step forward at USC. Let's see if Jacoby Brissett at North Carolina can have another good year. And if Connor Cook can just get away from these bonehead mistakes that he seems to make and sort of detach himself from sort of the averageness of his last season to have a chance to go early.
So who I know that Cody Kessler, I just looked at his numbers a couple of days ago, and like I said, I don't pay any attention. I mean, I do pay some attention, but his numbers last year were outstanding. What's wrong with him that would hold him back from being perhaps? What are the things that people are worried about with him?
He's not a mobile quarterback, and his accuracy fluctuates. So there's nothing really, really bad with his play. But when you watch him sort of dropping back and then he'll throw it downfield, fantastic. Someone receiver will make a big catch, big play, and he's a big play artist. But then so the little things, some accuracy issues there. Like I said, not mobile, he's not going to scramble out of the pocket. I think teams are going to emphasize. One of the big talking points in the NFL at the moment is that nearly everybody's offensive line is awful. And it's putting pressure on teams to find quarterbacks who are at least a little bit mobile. And Cody Kessler is a classic statue, big, tall, strong. And that is going to be an issue for him along with the accuracy issues there. But he's got the tools, he's big, he's tall, he can throw it downfield. One quarterback to keep an eye on who is very interesting is Carson Wentz at North Dakota State, who is small school guy, tall, strong, has the arm, but is mobile and can move around and does a bit of read option in that scheme. Although he's playing small school football, there is just something in a bit when you saw Joe Flacco playing for Delaware. There's just something a little bit there that's worth monitoring. He is a player who could rise this year with another big season and could be a bit of a surprise to go earlier than many people expect.
It is the first week of the college football season, and even though I am a Washington State fan, I'm actually excited for the upcoming college season. So we got some games going on this weekend, and it looks like there's the only one that has two top 20 teams is going to be a pretty big matchup, Wisconsin and Alabama. What kind of players would you look for in that game?
Well, Alabama have got the usual group, haven't they? The problem with Alabama prospects is they always seem to be worn out when they get to the NFL, but there's one or two to keep an eye on. The Seahawks eventually are going to have to draft another running back because they've got a situation with Marshawn Lynch. We don't know when he's going to retire. Just my personal view, I think the fact that he signed a 3-year deal means I think they're going to get at least 2 years out of him. I think that all of the retirement talk was kind of like a power play to try and get as much money as possible. I think that Marshawn Lynch is one of those guys who just loves the game and loves being part of a team. And I think there's going to be at least 2 years there. But Robert Turbin's a free agent next year. How much are you going to pay for a backup running back of his? He's an average running back, isn't he? And then you've got Christian Michael, who has struggled to make an impact. So it stands that they're going to be in the market. And if you can get that replacement for Lynch ahead of time, then it's something to consider. Hey, they took Christian Michael in 2013, was it? I mean, that was planning ahead and then some. So I think that a year early is not such a bad problem to have. Derrick Henry at Alabama is 6'3", 240 pounds, glides, even though he's got that size. I mean, he's an incredibly sized running back who can push the pile, but is faster than I think you sort of recognize when you see how big he is. So he's someone definitely at Alabama to keep an eye on. There's some great defensive linemen at Alabama. Ashawn Robinson is a candidate to go in the top 5, a bit like Marcel Darius, a guy who's going to go very early as a defensive tackle from Alabama. Jaron Reed plays alongside him. He's a kind of maybe a mid-round pick who could go a little bit earlier if he has a really good year. So they're the kind of players, and they've got a tight end in OJ Howard who has got all the hype, Kenny, but then came to Alabama and hasn't really put it together. And you want to see him be more consistent. Drops too many passes, hasn't dominated the way that everybody expected. Big things are expected of him. So let's see if he can have a bigger year this term. As for Wisconsin, there is very, very little to get excited about this year. Melvin Gordon was the key last year. They do have a center in Dan Voltz, he has a chance to make it at the next level. And with Seattle possibly needing a center next year, he's one name to sort of write down and keep an eye on. But you'd struggle to find much else in that Wisconsin team.
Is there any player out there right now that, with this upcoming week, you're the most excited to see actually get into a game, and you've been waiting all summer to see them play again? Who are some of those guys in college football that you really like to watch?
Oh, there's a few. I mean, I think in general, everyone wants to see Ohio State because they've got possibly about 10 or 12 guys who could go early. I mean, they are loaded. I think we want to see Zeke Elliott continue where he finished off at the end of last year and see him take that into this year. Alex Collins is a running back at Arkansas. I think if you were going to rank the running backs, or at least this is how I would do it, going into the new season, Zeke Elliott 1, Alex Collins 2, Derrick Henry 3, and Devontae Booker 4. So Alex Collins is going to play in a scheme where they're going to run so much at Arkansas, nearly every down. And with the other running back there getting injured, Alex Collins is going to be relied on a lot. So he's someone I really can't wait to see. Taylor Decker at Ohio State could play left tackle, right tackle, guard. Very athletic, but still has that toughness. He's going to be an early pick for me. One or two others. Sean Oakman, how is he? He has to be more consistent. He's got all the talent in the world and the size, but can he be more consistent and dominate games like he should be doing? There's I could list you about 5 or 6 cornerbacks that I want to see, and same with wide receivers. And receiver, even though Seattle have gone that way a few times over the last few years, that could still be a position they look at, especially with Doug Baldwin. I think he's only contracted until the end of 2016. Curse is a free agent next year. Paul Richardson, how's he going to come back from this? He's had 2 serious knee injuries now, so that could still be a position to monitor. One guy to keep an eye on in particular, Michael Thomas at Ohio State, another Ohio State guy, and also Darunya Wilson, who's had some issues this offseason with the law, but big, strong, tall, really interesting player.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating, like with Ohio State, because, I mean, everything you hear, they just won the national championship. Then they didn't lose some of the most important players on that team. But even if they did, in college football, when you're good, you just replace them with the next class of guys. It just seems like this could be the most talented team we've seen in a really long time, or is it just like, I mean, Florida State was just really, really talented. I mean, you keep going back, and a lot of teams that win the national championship are talented. So how does Ohio State look like they rank against some of the great teams of the last 15 years?
This Ohio State team compares favorably to the sort of Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, Alabama teams, who just had loads and loads of NFL talent. That's how good they are. I think they were, when we look back in hindsight, underrated from last year. And it's just that they've got talent everywhere, Kenny. They've got they're trying to decide between 3 quarterbacks, and all of them could start. They've got Zeke Elliott, who is a genuine Heisman Trophy candidate and would have to be the favorite for that award right now. They've got Decker on the offensive line, and we've talked about who could be a top 15 pick. And then on defense, Deron Lee is a potential first-round linebacker. You've got Joey Bosa, who we've talked about, definite first-round defensive end. You have got many, many others. One of the best names in college football, Eli Apple, who is a prospective top 15 cornerback from Ohio State. They've got
and Eli Manning plays in the Big Apple, so that's
maybe he's destined to go and play with Eli Manning in the Big Apple then. And
it's about time.
And Von Bell, who is a safety as well, then Michael Thomas that we've talked about. So they've just got a fantastic. I mean, all of those guys could go in the first 2 days of the draft.
How about for those, because obviously a lot of people will be from Seattle, so I know that Washington just lost 3 players in the first round, which is unheard of. So how are the Huskies? Are they building up and going with Chris Peterson? Are they going to be even better next year, or should they be taking a step back? And for me, please, is there any hope that the Cougs could be good and maybe make a bowl game?
I mean, I don't want to be so bold as to say, because this could come back to bite us given Washington State's recent history, but everything seems to be set up for Washington State to have a better record than Washington this year.
Oh, thank you.
And because Washington have lost the player, the first round, second round players that you've talked about there, and there just isn't anything coming through to get particularly excited about. This is going to be a real test for Peterson to sort of keep it going, have a solid season, get his guys in, but it is sort of 2 or 3 years down the line when he's really going to have the impact there. I think ESPN did an article where they said in, I don't know how many years they're going forward, maybe it's like 5 years, that they felt that Washington was going to be in a really strong position in sort of 4 or 5 years down the line because of the recruiting, because of Peterson, because of what he will do. But right now, they're not looking at a good year at all. Whereas Washington State, I mean, Mike Leach has got a system and a way of doing things, and he's got players who know the system. And for that reason, they should have that sort of consistency that maybe Washington's going to lack, that security of knowing who they are, what they are, who the key players are at certain positions. So I think that they've got a chance. But to be perfectly honest, it's hard to see either team going on and challenging the top teams in the Pac-12.
Yeah, that's understandable. Is there any sort of players in Washington right now, whether it be the 2016 draft or later, that seem like they could be really good NFL players?
Washington, no. I mean, I really am not enthused by the players at Washington. I do. There is an offensive tackle at Washington State who everyone's talking about. His name has just slipped me by. Who has got the potential to go in the first 2 days. But out of all of the players, he's the one to sort of get your focus on. The name will come to me in a minute, but that is the guy to keep an eye on with the two Washington teams.
Do you see, with sort of looking back at Mike Leach's career with Texas Tech, do you see any of these receivers that they have being able to go on to the next level in the way that Michael Crabtree and Wes Welker were able to succeed? Or is it really tough? Like, for you as an evaluator of prospects, do you hate watching games that have these big offenses like Mike Leach and Hawaii and the air raid and all that stuff? Do you hate it because it screws you up in terms of how you normally evaluate prospects, or do you like it? What are your thoughts on the air raid offense and these big play offenses?
The toughest one to analyze has been Oklahoma State, because what they were, especially during the Brandon Weeden, Justin Blackman period, because they just had Des Bryant, and obviously we all know what Des Bryant has gone on to do with the NFL. But then Justin Blackman comes forward as does Brandon Weeden, and what they were getting Weeden to do was essentially from the shotgun do a 7-step drop, or he was so far behind the line of scrimmage, which would then drop as well, which would open up the underneath in an incredible fashion. So because Whedon's dropped so far back, he wasn't feeling any pressure, crossing routes to the nth degree, and Justin Blackman was just running inside. Eventually he's going to get open. There's so much space. It just doubled the field essentially. And then they're throwing it to Justin Blackman. And they, of course, had mass production and everybody. And then Brandon Weeden got himself into a position where he was going to be a first-round pick. He never looked like it. I mean, I never, and people can go through the archives, I never once felt that Weeden deserved that level of grade. Forget the age. That reason, just watching him play, it was so easy for him, and it didn't translate to the NFL at all. But with the receivers, it's hard as well, because there is so much open space, and you have to say, even if you give a good college receiver 4, 5, 6 seconds, he's going to get open. So it was tough to analyze even players like Justin Blackman. And although they obviously had talent, when you were watching the tape, you didn't really feel like you were learning that much from it. And yet you learned so much more from someone like AJ Green, who had, I don't think he had a 1,000-yard season, at Georgia. I think his highest total was 800, 900 yards, maybe 5, 6 touchdowns.
Oh, wow.
Playing with Aaron Murray, and because they were running the ball and they were playing more like a pro-style offense, you could actually see him sort of competing, and you could see him running routes, and you could see the sort of the grittiness and the competitiveness was in his game as well, even though he was fairly slender and didn't look like a big receiver. So you could learn a lot more from less stats, better scheme, player doing the right things than you can spread it wide open, and that's one of the issues you have with it.
Let's go through some of these guys that are being, mocked, because the reason this podcast show is called 3000 NFL Mock Draft is sort of just, we're going to cover all the bases until well after we're dead. So it's like we're going all the way back and we're mocking the 3000 mock draft, but it is way too early to do a realistic 2016 NFL mock draft, but that doesn't keep anyone from doing it. So looking at Walter Football, who got that prestigious #1 Google hit that everyone knows, because if you Google NFL mock draft, Walter Football will always be the #1 pick, no matter what anyone else tries to do, like ESPN or anything. So, but also Walter, or the guy who runs it or whatever, is, I feel, incredibly inaccurate and also not that good at the mock drafts, but it is still a place to start. So I'm going to name these guys in chunks in terms of his 2016 NFL mock draft, and you just give me, some thoughts that you have on that particular group of players, whether or not it's accurate or whether or not you really disagree. So his top 5 picks are Cardale Jones, Joey Bosa, Christian Hackenberg, Laramie Tunnell, offensive tackle from Ole Miss. Yeah. Oh, okay. Tunsil, there it is. I need to get glasses. Actually, I had glasses and I lost them, and I just didn't replace them. So, and Connor Cook, quarterback of Michigan State. You talked a little bit about some of these players already. So, what about Laramie Tunsil?
Okay, so Tunsil had an injury last season, as did Treadwell, the great receiver at Ole Miss. He is incredibly, he has got everything that you would hope for in a in an NFL offensive tackle. If he comes back healthy, then he's got every chance. Just superb blocker, left tackle, great very physical in the run game as well. There's no reason to think that he can't be a top 10 pick, possibly top 5 if he comes back healthy. But like Treadwell, I mean, they're both immensely talented. They've got to come back from serious injuries.
Is Ole Miss? The only person that I want. The only teams that I want to win the national championship are the Cougs, which is never going to happen. I realize that. And a team like Ole Miss that happens every year where they're like in the top 2 late in the year before inevitably just blowing it and giving way to the traditional teams, which makes college football somewhat boring for me because there aren't very many surprises. There aren't many surprise national champions. Is Ole Miss looking like they could compete again? Who are some of those, and also who are some of the teams that could surprise this year?
Ole Miss I think will have a very similar year to last year, where they were very much in the running, as were Miss State, until right at the end, and then they will have a loss at some point. Ole Miss, and it's hard not to like Hugh Freeze and the kind of his energy and the system that he's got there. They've recruited very, very well and brought in a number of 5-star prospects. Many of them are actually now ready to. I mean, apart from Treadwell and Tunsil, you've got Kamdichi, who was compared to Jadeveon Clowney when he was in high school, and one or two others that have really, really got a chance of making it the next level. But yeah, I think that they and Miss State will be competitive. The SEC is going to be incredibly open this year, because you've got Alabama breaking in a new quarterback. You've got LSU maybe taking a few steps forward, but they have quarterback issues. You've got the 2 Mississippi sides there as well. I think everyone in Tennessee is hoping that they're going to have a better year. It is a lot more open than it has been in the past. Keep an eye on Florida with McElwain in there. He's a fantastic coach. Did a terrific job at Colorado State. So keep an eye on them, because he's big time coach.
Is the SEC, is that a Rob Staten thing, or is that a British thing?
It's what you mean, instead of calling it the SEC?
Yeah.
I think it might be a Rob Staten thing.
It might be a Rob Staten thing. Maybe it's an SEC thing. I don't know. So moving on to the next 5 players, he's got Ronnie Stanley, tackle at Notre Dame, Vernon Hargraves, cornerback from Florida, Robert Inamdikche, defensive end at Ole Miss, the guy you mentioned, Laquan Treadwell, and Tyler Boyd. So what are your thoughts on those 5?
Hargreaves is not going to go that early. Florida have had sort of 4 to 5 cornerbacks over the last few years who people have thought, yeah, do you know what, they're going to go early, and they are either boneheads or they're not as good as everybody expects. And Vernon Hargreaves, the more you watch of his play and the more you study him, he's going to be another one of those, and he's not going to go in the top 10 or 15 picks. Not when you have got so many other cornerbacks who are either just fundamentally better or just have got a better attitude. So you've got Kendall Fuller at Virginia Tech, who is better. You've got Tre'Davious White at LSU, who is better. You've got Eli Apple at Ohio State, who is better. You've got Cameron Sutton at Tennessee, who is better. There's a guy at Mississippi State called Will Redmond, who is he has got the potential to be better. And when you've got all those players there and there's less of a question mark around them, Hargreaves, for me, is going to sink a little bit. I can't see him going that. Did you mention Ronnie Stanley as well?
Yeah, I did. He's got. Oh, did I? Yes, he was number 6.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are so many better offensive linemen than him. I mean, after Tunsil, you've got Decker, you've got Conklin at Michigan State, you've got keep an eye on Sean Coleman at Auburn, because he's got huge potential. And they're the guys who. Brought through Greg Robinson, and Coleman again has just got an incredible amount of upside. Jermaine Ifedi at Texas A&M, who played right tackle in 2014, and like many of the others, I think Jake Matthews went right tackle, left tackle, and Cedric Abui did exactly the same thing. And Ifedi's going to do it this year, so he's another one to keep an eye on. Again, Ronnie Stanley's all right, but at times in the run game you just don't see it, and that seems a little bit early for me. I think he's a borderline round 1, round 2 type prospect.
I know I've heard a lot about Tyler Boyd. That's a name that sounds familiar. I mean, I have a friend named Boyd, so that could be it too. But Well, what's the deal with Tyler Boyd? And the last 2 draft classes for wide receiver have been out of this world. So
Yeah.
what is that going to continue in 2016?
Boyd is kind of like a diet version of Percy Harvin. So he's not got the incredible, insane athleticism as Harvin, but he's that type of player and just very competitive, insane playmaker, similar size. So he's not a big receiver, but you can pretty much line him up anywhere and he's going to make plays for you. As for the, he should be a first round prospect. As for the class in general, if Treadwell gets back, he's the X factor guy. He's like the top 10 talent who would get top 10 most years. So he's got a chance, but he had a horrific broken leg in one of Ole Miss's games at the end of last year. And if he comes back, power to him. You've got Duke Williams at Auburn, really, just looks a bit like Des Bryant, but again, maybe sort of a lighter version of Des Bryant. And he's not quite as spectacular, but has that same kind of presence on the field. Darunya Wilson, big time basketball skills. Marquise North at Tennessee, struggled with bad quarterbacks there. You've got Mike Williams at Clemson, another Mike Williams, just what we needed. You've got a guy called Pharaoh Cooper at South Carolina, who's fairly interesting. And then you've got Rashard Higgins at Colorado State, who's just put up insane numbers. But without McElwain and without Garrett Grayson, is he going to be able to reproduce that? I'm not convinced of that. He's going to have to prove a lot of people wrong because without the quarterback and without the coach, it's hard for that offense to produce that way. So it's looking like a good class with possibly, I would say, you might get 2, 3 at a stretch first round prospects out of that list.
Oh, okay. And then if the Seahawks wanted to, like you said before, they might be looking at a wide receiver again. I think that Tyler Lockett fills a great need. But, he does what he does. Paul Richardson, even if he comes back, they're still looking. No receiver on the team is over 6 feet except for Chris Matthews. So they're still looking for, it would seem they're still looking for that kind of guy if it's not going to be Matthews. Do you see some 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks? Because we already know they're going to trade the 1st round pick. So do you see some wide receivers that sort of fit that taller mold that for the day 2?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of that. We've come to know now they take receivers in either round 2 or round 4, sort of that kind of round 3.
Please stop taking receivers in round 4. How is that working out?
It doesn't work. So if they're looking in that same range again, because of these sort of off-field issues and a bit of rawness there, someone like Darunya Wilson, big, tall basketball guy, box out wide receiver, is that type of player that Seattle's lacked. He's probably going to go in that sort of round 2, round 3 range. Apart from that, you're probably looking at somebody like, Duke Williams could go in round 2 as well. And then later on, Michael Thomas is not quite the big receiver, but he's fast and can get downfield, and he's got enough size. He's got enough size for Seattle, I'd say.
Going over, still continuing Walter's list, A'Shawn Robinson. I like that name, A'Shawn, A''Sean. Do you guys do that in the UK? Do you have?
No.
Is this a trend in the UK?
It's not. No, it's distinctly American, I would say. So there's definitely no like the Joseph Smiths or anything like that over here. No.
You didn't name your son DeRob Staten Jr.? Did you?
No, he's just Henry. He's not like a Henry Staten or.
He is a Henry Staten.
He is. Yes, he is a Henry Staten, but he's not. It's not like we've got like Sua Cravens in this class and A'Shawn Robinson and people like that. Yeah, it's nothing like that.
Speaking of which, we're getting there. A'Shawn Robinson, the first player to come out of Alabama in his mock draft. Miles Jack, who he's got as a two-way player at UCLA. Jalen Ramsey, safety of Florida State. Taylor Decker, another Ohio State guy. And then Sua Cravens. Rest in peace, Wes Craven. But Sua Cravens, safety at USC. So those 5 guys.
Yeah, no one can dispute that the guy from Alabama, A'Shawn Robinson, is a top 10 pick. I mean, he again, like Marcel Darius went number 3 overall. That's kind of his ceiling to go that early, I would guess. Sua Cravens, I can't see him going that early at all. I mean, he's one of those. There's a couple of guys that I like who are kind of like linebacker safeties, and that might interest Seattle, especially if they, I don't know, have to replace a linebacker safety who wants to hold out all the time. They've got Sua Cravens who could maybe do that kind of role. And there's a guy called Eric Stryker who is at Oklahoma, who's a very interesting guy, big playmaker, plays linebacker for Oklahoma, but he's not quite big enough to play linebacker, may convert to safety, and he's just a pure playmaker. So keep an eye on Eric Stryker this year. Who are the other names that were...
I'm interested in this Miles Jack. It seems like that's an Anthony Barr situation. Same school, same positions.
Well, he does play a bit of running back and has been productive for UCLA as a running back. I think he's pretty much going to be a linebacker at the next level. But he's a fun player to watch. But again, is he going to go quite as early as projected there? No, he's a big name, and that's why he's probably being projected that in the mock. But I could list about 20 guys I would put ahead of him right now.
I mean, Miles Jack and that kid Stryker, those are some good linebacker names. There's no doubt about that. So going on here at number 16, this is the other thing. I mean, going to the San Diego Chargers. He's also predicting how these teams are going to do, which is just ridiculous. But Leonard Floyd out of Georgia. And then we've got Shalik Calhoun, another good name.
Oh, no.
Scooby Wright, perfect. Kendall Fuller, obviously the brother of Kyle Fuller. I can put that together. And Duke Williams.
Duke Williams, no issues with that. Shalik Calhoun is one of the most overrated players in college football and was touted as a first-round pick last year. Didn't declare because he had an awful year. And is now coming back to try and have another go. I can't see it. It offers absolutely nothing. As a defensive end, he's not a speed guy. He's not a power guy. He's not a big sack guy. I struggle to see him as much more than a late round pick. Quite honestly, I like Scooby Wright, but he's not a first round talent. I mean, he's a productive, fun linebacker who is probably going to go in the middle rounds somewhere.
Kyle Fuller's brother here.
Yeah. One of the better cornerbacks, and as soon as he stepped on the field for Virginia Tech, he looked like a star in the making. His first game might have been against Alabama, actually, and I think he was covering Amari Cooper, and he was fantastic. And from that moment onwards, he's looked like Kendall Fuller has looked like a first-round talent, and obviously great bloodlines, as you talked about. And his brother went in the first round to Chicago. There's another brother playing in Detroit, so he's going to be a first-round pick.
Coming in next is your guy, Ezekiel Elliott. We had two running backs go in the first round this past year. That's Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon. It was becoming a rarity, and I think it's still going to continue to be a rarity. Do you see Elliott, even if he wins the Heisman, going in the first round? And is there any other running backs that could challenge?
I think he'll be the only running back in the first round, but I could see it. I'm not convinced, though, because he's not Todd Gurley's a freak of nature, and Melvin Gordon is one of the hardest working, honest players you'll ever meet, and an insane gym rat athlete. So you were talking about two rare players who big things were expected very early in their careers. Zeke Elliott is small, lacks size, hasn't got great breakaway speed, but what he is he just hits the pile and his legs don't stop moving, and he'll drag the pile a couple of extra yards. He's incredibly gritty and determined. But when he's not at the next level, is his size going to be an issue? Is the fact that he doesn't compensate with amazing speed going to be an issue? He's going to be productive, but I just wonder whether or not he's going to be much more than a pretty good NFL running back as opposed to, a superstar.
If Reggie Bush happened today, let's say we don't have Reggie Bush's prior career. Let's just say that we dropped him in today, and he was just the same guy that he was at USC. So exciting and exhilarating, Heisman and all the hype, to the point of at the end of the NFL season, people saying that the Texans lost a game on purpose so that they could draft Reggie Bush, even though they obviously drafted Mario Williams. That's who they ended up going. But Bush went number 2 to the Saints, who may have not even had a need for running back, but it was just sort of like, well, this is such a great once-in-a-generation prospect that we have to have him. But if you took that same guy and you dropped him in today's NFL climate, where would he go?
I think there's every chance he could be a top 10 pick because the NFL likes the special talent running backs, so the ones they perceive to be special, they have difference-making skills. So Trent Richardson had looked that. I mean, whatever people want to say about him now, in Alabama he looked like a special player. He goes 3rd overall. Todd Gurley would have been, goodness knows where he would have gone if he'd not had the knee injury, because he went 10th overall with it. Incredible player. And you sort of go back through the years, and the guys who have gone really, really early have all had that. And Reggie Bush, if he was coming in now, would still have that insane speed, nice size, and that sort of superstar feel to his personality. So I still think he would have been a very, very early pick.
Did you see like Trent Richardson when you watched him at Alabama versus when you watched him at Cleveland? Did you see him change his style? Was he trying to do things that were different than what made him successful at Alabama, or was he simply just not as good as we thought?
I think it's one of the hardest positions to sort of translate to the next level, because for Alabama he was just an absolute monster, and he was speed, size, unstoppable. Hit the pocket and just like drove people out the way. Terrific playmaker, but everything becomes bigger, faster, stronger at the next level. And when all of a sudden he was facing defensive players who were equals to him in terms of athleticism, power, speed, and he didn't separate. I mean, he did nothing to really go that next level. And while he was special in college, he got to the NFL and was just one of the guys. And he just doesn't seem to have that fire burning in him. Okay, what do I need to do to be successful at this level? Everything's come so easy to him before that when he was put in a position where he had to go and make it happen, he was unable to do it. And he's going to get cut, I think, by Oakland probably before the start of the season. And that might be the end of his career.
That's insane. Do you see anybody in college football that resembles Marshawn Lynch?
No, and I don't think we ever will. He's a one of a kind. But this is the problem Seattle's going to have. I mean, we saw it against San Diego. Without Lynch in there, the offense just doesn't look the same. And it's harsh to sort of just judge it based on one preseason game against a very good AFC West opponent. But you can see that it's going to be hard for Seattle when they eventually do move on from Marshawn Lynch. I think they're going to have to. I think when the day comes, they're going to end up looking for a superstar type of running back to try and replace him. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think they're going to have to I don't think they're just going to put guys in there and say, okay, this is what we've got now. I think they are, which is why with Christian Michael, they took him because he had this just unbelievable combination of athletic skills, insane potential. And they were willing to sort of see if they could form that into a functioning player. And I think they will do that ultimately with another player down the line. It's hard to find them in this class. I mean, Derrick Henry, as big and as fast as he is, looks like a complementary piece to maybe a running back by committee approach. Alex Collins, I really like Alex Collins. Alex Collins, if you get a chance to watch Arkansas this year, watch it and keep an eye on Alex Collins. It's such a great combination of speed and physicality.
Well,
but he's not Marshawn Lynch. So
I hope that, me doing a college football podcast, I will watch more college football, I hope. And definitely, I'm assuming Arkansas will be on TV a bit. So these next guys are Jalen Smith. Oh God, give me a break with these names. Kivare Russell. I don't know. That's the other thing. Is capitalization in names as well. It's KEI capital V. Like, I'm never going to remember that. I hope this guy doesn't make it in the NFL or changes his name, because I'm never going to remember how to spell this, and it's just going to cause writers problems. Tony Connor, Derrick Henry, the guy you were talking about. So that would be his second running back in the first round. And DeForest Buckner, which is that's almost an offensive name. DeForest? I mean, come on, we're trying to save the forest. What do you think of these guys? Jalen Smith, Russell, Tony Connor, Derrick Henry, you already spoke of, and DeForest Buckner.
DeForest Buckner has got a really good chance of going in the first round. If Eric Armstead's going to go in the first round, and DeForest Buckner is not quite the same athlete, but he's a better player overall, then Buckner's going to go in the first round for sure. I know this is really bad form for our first podcast, Kenny.
Oh yeah, no.
I should have known better. No, but my battery is about to run out, and I need to go and get my plug. Otherwise, you're going to be talking to yourself. So can you kind of just fill for 30 seconds while I go and get it?
Sure thing.
It's a good start.
Yeah, no, it happens. So this is just me talking to the world. This is sort of like Garth in Wayne's World, but I try not to freeze up. But you got to do what you got to do when a guy's out there. But seriously, these names, DeForest Buckner. I mean, what's next? Okay, now into the mind of a comedy writer. What's next? DeForest Buckner What's next? Abolish Smith? I don't know. Abolishing things, it just depends on the context, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, they abolished slavery, so that actually made abolishing a good thing. Or, you could have something along the lines of murder Johnson, nuke space Ryerson, because you don't want to nuke space. I want to make sure that we still have space when the time comes. So when the time comes for us to go into space, a situation like Interstellar, or a situation like what's the name? The one that starts with a P. I like that movie. It's got.
Okay.
Oh, hey.
You're feeling nicely there.
Yeah, you'll have to go back and watch it one day. There's some real diamonds there. I came up with, what are some other names like DeForest Buckner, like Murder Johnson or something like that. So anyway, it's a good moment for all those fans out there of this very popular podcast. So some of these guys, he's got a couple Notre Dame fellows here, Jalen Smith and Kavare Russell. How are those guys, and is Notre Dame going to compete for the championship?
No, I can't see Notre Dame competing for the championship. I really like Jalen Smith as a linebacker with genuine first-round potential. Just great combination of skills that you look for. Great athlete. I mean, he alongside Deron Lee have got a real good chance of going in the first round. I think you mentioned Leonard Floyd earlier. For me, just too inconsistent and at Georgia, and not enough of the pass rushing skills are very overrated for me. So I can't. He's less of a likely to go in the first round. The other two guys are more sort of orthodox linebackers. So as for the other guy from Notre Dame, not one that I've had a chance to look at yet, but certainly Jalen is one that should go in the first round. Yeah.
So moving on, that would be Nate Andrews, a safety at Florida State, Chris Jones from Mississippi State, Cameron Sutton out of Tennessee, and Darren Lee, another Ohio State player.
Yeah, Lee's going to go in the first round. Cameron Sutton is a player with the size that Seattle likes at cornerback, and possibly someone that Seattle fans should keep an eye on, because he is a bit like a few Tennessee players, has not kind of lived up to the potential and the talent that they've got. But as the team is never really competitive and has always been a bit of a mess for the last few years, it's hit players like Sutton and Marquise North as well. If Tennessee can have a better year, then it's going to help their better players. And Sutton is really one to keep an eye on because, like I say, he's got the size, sort of fits that Seahawks profile. So he is someone to keep an eye on there.
And I left one for a reason. This is an interesting thing that I just realized I'd forgotten or whatever. It hadn't filed away in the old brain, but only going to be 31 first-round picks next year because the Patriots lost theirs. So he's got the last team, presumably the Super Bowl winner, Seattle Seahawks, taking Sean Oakman, the player out of Baylor that decided to go back to school.
Yeah, and given that Seattle already seems to have found a diamond in Frank Clark, I don't think that defensive end in the first round is likely. But then Sean Oakman has got difference-making athleticism. He's a fantastic character guy as well. Incredible leader. The coaches at Baylor really trust him. So there's that, a lot to like about him there. But it's hard right now, isn't it, Kenny, to look beyond offensive line, potentially defensive tackle. If Brandon Meebane's a free agent. And then just to look at some of those difference makers. If Zeke Elliott, is that one someone they would consider? Maybe. But given that it's such a wonderful offensive line class with Afedi at Texas A&M and Tunzel, we've talked about, and Decker and Conklin and Coleman and another Baylor guy in Drango.
That's a good name.
And the Washington State tackle, whose name I still haven't remembered.
I feel like I should be the one that knows it since I'm such a diehard fan. But
there seems like a lot of options there for if they wanted to go with an offensive lineman, which I think most people would say seems like a safe bet right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at it, I mean, it's hard to justify that. I mean, at this point, how can we not know John Schneider and Pete Carroll's philosophy a little bit to know that, their first and second round picks, the majority by far is offense. I mean, they either trade them for Percy Harvin or Jimmy Graham. They use them on Russell Okung, James Carpenter, Justin Britt, second round, Kristen Michael, second round. You know, and then am I missing something? You know, then the only one that I can think of is Earl Thomas in terms of the first and second round for defenses. Golden Tate, second round. So it seems like it's pretty obvious to me that they like to draft their offense, and, you know, because I think that they realize how much money they need to spend on their defense, that maybe they're going to try and replace some of those players on offense. Since you got to take a break, I think it's not that bad for me to just look up this name here for a second. Are you talking about Negalu Tapa?
No.
Destiny Veo?
No.
Daryl Paulo?
No.
Devontae McClain?
No.
Hunter Maddox?
No.
Jacob Laird?
No.
Some of these guys are freshmen, so they couldn't be who you're talking about. Daniel Okoye?
No.
Reggie Coates?
No.
Austin Brown?
No.
You sure it's a defensive tackle?
Offensive tackle.
Offensive tackle. Damn it. Oh, God, there's so many of them. Okay. Cedric Big Duran. Oh, wait. Okay, Moritz Christ.
No.
Joe Dahl.
It may be Joe Dahl that I'm thinking of, yeah.
Okay.
So there we go. I think we've solved them.
I don't think that was so far as the highlight of the first podcast was naming players on Washington State, for the most part naming the wrong position. I also want to kind of look to the future a little bit, because I get excited also about freshmen. I mean, last year we had some great freshman performances in college football, from what I do know. In terms of the 2017 or 2018 draft, is there anybody that could be that next? You know, I don't want to bring up the name Andrew Luck or whatever, but someone like the next Andrew Luck or Jadeveon Clowney, in terms of how excited people will be for the number one pick? It's real tough to find quarterbacks who are, certainly there isn't anybody coming forward that you would say, well, they've got the same kind of potential as someone like Andrew Luck. There is a running back group that I think a lot of people are excited about. So Fournette, LSU, just an absolute bulldozer of a running back. When he eventually comes out, that's going to be exciting. You've got Chubb at Georgia, again, another very interesting player who sort of picked up the slack when Gurley got injured last year. I guess if there is one quarterback who has shown a little bit of something, it's Kaya at Miami, who was a big recruit, started as a freshman, and I think he'll be eligible for 2017, and has shown in flashes, but has also shown a lot of mistakes. And he's got everything in tools, mobility, but he's not he doesn't look like a Marcus Mariota, who I think you would sort of compare him mostly to in terms of that accuracy, speed, mobility. So he's going to have to make some big steps forward if he's going to get to that level. I think it's mainly the running backs to get excited about, and there's some nice offensive linemen that Alabama is one to keep an eye on as he eventually comes into eligibility. There's another Lotulelei coming through. He will eventually hit the draft from Utah, and some of these guys who we've talked about are seniors as well. So there is an opportunity down the line. I mean, I'd quite like to see Christian Hackenberg stay the duration, because I think he's the kind of player who needs a lot of time. And I think if he declares for the draft too early, it's going to be an issue for him. Yeah. What about in terms of this last class, the 2015 NFL draft? Any early thoughts on some of those big names like Marcus Mariota and Jameis Winston?
Well, luckily over here we get a chance to see a lot of different preseason games. So it was quite fun to watch the San Francisco 49ers offensive line against the Denver Broncos. It kind of made me feel a lot better about Seattle's performance against Denver in week one, because it was an absolute disaster. And Kaepernick had even less time than Russell Wilson did in that Week 1 game. But I have had a chance to watch Mariota twice and Winston twice. And Mariota I can't remember who they were playing now, in one of the games had a horrible start and couldn't do anything and was under a lot of pressure. The receivers didn't make any plays for him. Tennessee got behind quite early in the game. And then all of a sudden, Mariota just turned it on. And he was making gains with his legs. All of his passes were very accurate. Found Kendall Wright for a big play. And I think the big thing for Tennessee is just to show a bit of faith. I mean, Ken Wisenhunt is a coach who is kind of like the anti-Pete Carroll and doesn't show faith in big playmakers or young guys. Instead, what he does is he puts faith in veterans because he knows what he's going to get from them. So there are receivers there that are just long in the tooth or not very good anymore. Just give Kendall Wright and Donovan Beckham, get them out there, get them working to get that connection going. They're your best playmakers and make something happen. It was a shame for Washington fans, though, in the game that I saw. Bishop Sankey fumbled quite awfully in that game and generally didn't look great. So his prospects in Tennessee not looking too smart. In Tampa Bay, Jameis Winston showed genuine quality, like looking off defenses, opening up space for his tight end, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, using Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans perfectly, taking shots downfield, even showing a bit of extra mobility that wasn't necessarily always there at Florida State. The issue he's got is he's playing behind, again, another horrendous offensive line, which has been hammered by injuries. They've got Ali Marpet. They've thrown him right in at the deep end, starting him straight away from Hobart University. Their tackles are injured. They've just got no protection. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on Winston to diagnose blitzers and protection, which he isn't doing very well in preseason. You have to get it out very, very quickly, and he's going to have to hope that Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson and Austin Seferian-Jenkins are ready to play, because otherwise he's going to get hit an awful lot this year.
Do you think the Falcons coming out of that division with it looking so kind of terrible?
I think so. I think that Dan Quinn inherits a team that's underachieved for 2 years. They've obviously got a franchise quarterback who's got a franchise wide receiver. They've got Tevin Coleman there to add to Freeman at the running back. They've invested in their offensive line. Defensively, they've brought Quinn in to sort of get that moving, and he's got Vic Beasley now as well. So I think there's a real chance for Atlanta to win that division. I think that they and New Orleans, Carolina are going to be competitive as well. Tampa Bay are on the outside looking in, I think, for another year.
And if we're looking ahead to next year's draft, obviously I alluded to earlier the fact that if you're going to do a mock draft, you have to pretend like you know how it's going to finish. So who are some of those teams that you expect to be picking in the top 3?
I think the usual suspects are going to be there. Jacksonville, Tennessee, and maybe even Tampa Bay again. But I think the team that's going to get the number 1 overall pick next year, and I think they're kind of preparing for this, is Washington. And they've just had it's just a mess. I mean, the franchise is a mess. And I think we're in a situation now where Gruden is almost taking on the position of a lame duck coach, because they've got a new GM and an owner who brought Gruden in and who was sold on the idea that Gruden could get RG3 playing. It hasn't happened. So if they get the number 1 overall pick, Gruden goes, McLaughlin gets to bring his guy in, and they can properly start rebuilding this, because the RG3 project is just becoming a farce. It's a soap opera, and Kirk Cousins, did Kirk Cousins play against Seattle last year? I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah.
And I liked Kirk Cousins at Michigan State, but he's incredibly limited, and there's nothing even remotely positive about that defense. And they're playing in the NFC East, which I think is going to be very good this year. And I think that Dallas, New York, and Philadelphia will have winning records. So I could see Washington getting the number 1 pick.
Yeah, there's like a Vine or a GIF going around today, and I don't remember. I must have been from last year, where it's just Kirk Cousins dropping back, looking over, surveying the field, throwing a pass, and it goes right in line to the defender, where it's just like there's no one else even close to the defensive player. He clearly thought that was his guy, and he threw it to him. So that's going around today, what with him being named the starter for the whole season.
I thought was great is that Peter King did put a tweet out earlier saying oh, they should consider Colt McCoy as well. And it's like, well, Kirk Cousins or Colt McCoy is kind of like the NFL version of, well, do you want a kick in the balls or a punch in the face? I mean, neither is appealing. I'll take the balls. Kirk Cousins is the balls.
I mean, this is a team that, Washington, they just, as long as they are under the same ownership, they're just going to continue to go into the same problems. This is a team that 5 years ago, their quarterback competition was legitimately Rex Grossman versus John Beck. And that was like, we're going to go with one of these guys, and it's incredible that, and then here we are now where, you're saying Colt McCoy or Kirk Cousins, and the guy that you traded 3 first-round picks for is basically not going to be the guy. What do you think is wrong, like, with Robert Griffin III? Why can't he relive the magic of 2012?
The injuries have obviously had an issue, and he's just not the same player. So when he's running around and sort of being the mobile quarterback that he was in his rookie year, he just doesn't look the same anymore. He's not got that same. And this is a guy who's had 2, maybe 3 serious knee injuries in his career, and eventually that's going to take a toll. I think he's a confidence player. I think that winning the Heisman at Baylor, coming into the NFL, being a big superstar suited him. But as soon as people started to doubt him, I think he's so frail and fragile with his psyche that I think he's in a world of, like, his own little world, and I'm worried for him, because I think that he gives all the signs of a guy who constantly considers his own image, and I think if he ever found himself out of the league, having achieved what modest achievements he's had, that it will really, really get to him, and that's a real concern for him. He's just not a good player. He's horrendous. And he needs to get out of Washington and hope that someone else will give him a chance. I'm not sure they will.
What he did in the second half of that 2012 season, before having his knee wrecked, it was insane. Those last 6 games or whatever, Washington went from like 4th place to 1st place, and he was unstoppable. But when you also say, like, for going back to the draft, when you say there's going to be an emphasis on mobile quarterbacks, isn't that also part of the fear? Is that you can become immobile, whereas Andrew Luck, maybe, even though he is mobile, he was never really relied on his legs to begin with. So is that always going to be sort of an issue?
I think with Luck, he's got legs like trees. And even though he moves around, he just looks, he looks like you could give him a real hit and he'd just get up, he'll pat you on the head and say, oh, great hit. Whereas every time Robert Griffin III gets hit, he looks like his body contorts and twists, and you see his arms and legs flailing around like a crashed dummy or something. And he just looks like he's being destroyed every time he gets hit. Whereas with Luck, he goes down and and he gets back up, and he's always got a smile on his face. And he's very polite and says, oh, great job, defense, and then gets back to the line. And that's just the way he is. And that's the thing you've got to do. Wilson's kind of the same, isn't he? Russell Wilson, he gets hit a lot, but he never kind of gets up and looks gimpy. When he goes down, he knows how to protect himself. So you've got to look for that. And it's going to get harder and harder for teams to find franchise quarterbacks, because for years, Kenny, we've always kind of had a guy who was a sophomore who you knew was going to get there, or a guy who was coming through, or guys would emerge from the JUCO ranks like Cam Newton. And you're going into years now, and you really are. People are talking up Connor Cook at Michigan State like he's a legit. He's basically Kirk Cousins. He's very similar, and yet people are talking up, trying to convince themselves that he's going to be. And people like Jared Goff as well. There's a real dearth. It's difficult because of so many spread systems now. I wouldn't want to be a team needing a franchise quarterback, and I think that's why guys like Blake Bortles end up going 3rd overall, because anybody who gives even a hint that they can do it is going to go early. Yeah,
and I think it's almost an advantage for Russell Wilson to be 5'11" in this, or 5'10" in this respect, that when you're 6'5" compared to being 5'10", if you're going to get hit, if you're going to run around and get hit, he's so much more compact, and he's so much more harder for you. Like you said, when Robert Griffin gets hit, it's like a ragdoll effect where just everything's flying around and flailing around. Whereas, Russell Wilson gets hit like a running back, because running backs get hit, 300 times a season. And it's like he just needs to, avoid injury, getting hit, maybe 50 times. But even then, he avoids hits so well. He avoids getting tackled so much, and he knows that, he has to. I don't think that another quarterback could really have as much success behind Seattle's offensive line. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that also they've been able to make decisions on the offensive line that they probably wouldn't have done if, for example, Matt Flynn had ended up. Let's say Russell Wilson gets picked before the 75th pick in round 3 in 2012. Imagine how time would have been different over these last few years without that. But Matt Flynn starts, and they end up maybe getting another pocket passer or whatever. Then I think we would have seen them put more focus on the offensive line in the same way that maybe Dallas has done. And say, we need to protect the quarterback. We need to prioritize that. We need to get a big receiver in there. And this is how we're going to play. And because they had Wilson and because he's so mobile and because they want to make control chaos with him as the quarterback, I think they've been able to make decisions on the offensive line that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So it's not just the fact that drafting Wilson changes your perspective in terms of winning games. It also possibly changes your personnel decisions as well.
And what do you see exactly? Like, it's just, we could do one more like maybe NFL type question, but with the Packers situation and Jordy Nelson going down and then Randall Cobb, having a shoulder scare, obviously he's not going to play this week. I would be scared for the Packers to play anybody if I was a Packers fan, but after Cobb, let's say Cobb did miss a week, that's the thing with the reason that I don't think the Packers are that great is I think they're a lot more – they're so top-heavy and have such little depth. I think they have a great offensive line, a great quarterback. They had 2 great wide receivers. Now they have 1, but I like Devontae Adams, but I don't think that they have enough that when one player goes down – I mean, they've already proven in the past that when Aaron Rodgers goes down, they're absolute garbage. And if everybody's worse when their quarterback goes down for the most part, but to be absolute garbage as compared to being a Super Bowl contender, it's a pretty big difference. What do you think is going to – well, who are some of the younger guys that maybe we haven't heard of on the Packers with their wide receivers that if called upon, might be breakout players this season?
Well, I watched the first half of Green Bay against Philadelphia this week, and Sam Bradford and Philadelphia look really good, by the way. But Green Bay used Ty Montgomery a lot, and he made one big play. I think he almost ran a seam route, and Brett Hundley was the quarterback, and he got the start. Rodgers didn't play, and then Montgomery just burst off through the middle. Really nice play. I think that Ty Montgomery was a guy we talked a lot about. Thinking the Seahawks might draft him. He's a player who could really step up. So it's not just Adams; it's going to be him as well. Jeff Giannis has made some plays. He may again an athletic freak from a year ago, and has got all the athleticism you want. Maybe a year's experience as well will help him. So if he stays on the roster, he's got a chance to make plays too. So they're 2 guys that Green Bay. The thing is Aaron Rodgers is such a good quarterback that I think he's going to find a way to make it work. The only issue that I would have for Green Bay is that their defense just looks gassed nearly. Yeah. Apart from that really good half in the NFC Championship game, have you ever been convinced by Green Bay's defense? And I remember watching them last year struggle against New York, the Jets at home, and against Matt Ryan and a really average looking Atlanta side that was drifting towards a coaching change late in the season. And Green Bay's defense just struggled in both games. And it's that, and Rodgers really is the be-all and end-all for them. And if I'm Seattle and I'm going to Lambeau, I'm just saying we have got to do we've got to be more creative on offense, and we have got to dominate this game in offense because that will give us a great chance to win. We can't rely on Rodgers not throwing Richard Sherman's way. We've got to go at them. We've got to win this game on offense ourselves.
Yeah,
San Francisco did that. Game.
What did?
That's what San Francisco did in Lambeau twice. Just went out there and won the game on offense, not because they took it away from Rodgers because their offense game plan was so good.
Yeah, and Brandon Bostick released today, so then that's another thing.
Maybe they can get him back.
Maybe. So this Thursday, the college football season kicks off. The first game is going to be Alcorn State at Georgia Tech on ESPN3, and then TCU at Minnesota. TCU, I didn't even realize, number 2 in the country. Is that a chance? Is that a real possibility for them to stay in the top 2?
Yeah, a lot of people thought they should have gone to the playoffs last year. They've got a chance to be number one. They're just going to keep going and hope that some of the thing is a high state chance to win out. TCU has got a chance to win out, and their big game is going to be against Baylor, obviously. And then I can't see are Oregon going to win out. I can't see it. So there's. And then in the SEC or the SEC, then there's a chance that again that they're all going to sort of take a loss in that division. So in the East and the West, so it presents a chance for TCU to go all the way. I think they're a pretty good favorite because they've maintained a lot of the players they had last year, and their scheme was rolling when it got into when they figured it out last year. They were really good. Yeah.
Any teams that you see as being really overrated based on reputation? The top 10 is Ohio State, TCU, Alabama, Baylor, Michigan State, Auburn, Oregon, USC, Georgia, and Florida State.
Florida State they're not gonna have as good a year this year. I'm pretty sure of that. ACC is wide open. USC, I don't know. It depends. I just love what happened at USC these last couple of weeks. It's just it's very funny that just to have the coach having a night, just going up there and kind of embarrassing the team a little bit. But I don't know. They just don't look right at USC. Ever since Carroll left, they just don't seem to have kept that magic going. So I just can't see them being in the top 10 for very long. And Baylor have got a new quarterback. I know their scheme's very, very simplified, but they don't have that sort of prolific quarterback now. So that could be an issue for them as well. So they're maybe three teams that I don't think are going to last there. I think there's one or two others that are going to. Is Auburn not in the top 10? I mean, they're usually pretty strong.
Auburn, I think I said them. Yeah, Auburn's number 6.
Okay. Well, they've got a chance, and maybe someone like Arkansas is going to take a big step forward this year because they are so physical and they threw away a few games last year, so they could be a bit of a dark horse.
Well, there you go. Arkansas, number 18. So that'll wrap up the first episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Any final thoughts, Rob?
Well, actually, it's going to be a really good draft next year. I think that there's a lot of interesting prospects to look at positions of need. We've talked about some of them here. I'm sure we'll get into more of them as the weeks go on. But when you're talking about cornerback, wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line, and to a certain degree running back, they are maybe Seattle's target areas. And that's the thing. As the season goes on, we'll learn more and more about Seattle's needs going into the draft. But as we stand here now, sort of considering what the needs are, there's a lot of options there. So it's going to be fun to keep an eye on it and sort of see how some of these guys do. But it looks like it could be a good – there may be as many as 30 players who have potential to have first-round grades going into this year, which is a marked improvement on last year.
Yeah, and that's the other thing as well. You chuckled when I said Alcorn State as well. When you're watching games this weekend, does that sort of frustrate you? I mean, some of these teams that are playing top 25 teams include Alcorn State, Texas, San Antonio, Tennessee, Martin, Wofford, Southeast Missouri State. Maybe I've heard of them. But there's a lot of teams that, McNeese State playing LSU. These are going to be like 72-0 games. Do you sort of get frustrated watching these ones?
Yeah, and you don't learn anything. I mean, I can remember actually the one thing you can maybe learn is there's if you kind of watch the big plays from those games. So I remember watching LSU a couple of years ago, and Odell Beckham, I think in the first LSU game, had a day. And he's on the radar immediately. And then 2 or 3 weeks in, we were talking constantly on the blog about Odell Beckham. And, it's very easy to sort of say, oh, look how good he is now and stuff like that. But there was those sort of first 2 weeks when LSU were playing small teams that he sort of set the tone for the rest of the year and announced his launch towards being a really high draft pick. So you can learn stuff from those. But I mean, there's 1 or 2 interesting games. Louisville are going to take on Auburn. Bobby Petrino against an Auburn team. That should be interesting. Arizona State play Texas A&M, who I don't think are ranked in the top 25, which is a surprise. And Texas take on Notre Dame. So although I don't see Texas or Notre Dame particularly challenging for the playoffs this year, especially not Texas, there's usually one or two Longhorn players who, I mean, Malcolm Brown went in the first round to New England. He's a fantastic player. And as we've talked to, one or two or three Notre Dame players. So there are still some interesting games, but it's better when the divisional stuff starts going, when the SEC are played every week, when you get some big Pac-12 matchups and ACC matchups as well. You know, when Clemson play Florida State and when Georgia Tech play those teams as well, it gets interesting. So we've kind of got to wait a couple of weeks for that. Yeah,
I mean, every year, at least one team has their season ruined in the first week without having realized that it was going to happen. So thank you for watching. As soon as this is available as a podcast for download, we will let you know. And we'll be back every Monday or Tuesday, depending, and talking about college football and the draft. So come back next week we'll have a full week of football games. Are you excited, Rob?
Oh, very excited. And I promise my battery will be fully charged next week, Kenny, so I don't have to leave you hanging there.
Perfect. Both as a euphemism of, being energized and ready to get that battery recharged, but also in reality with your laptop. So so come back next week. And, also, when we become a podcast, if you want to make a theme song, some sort of images or whatever, just send them along. If you want to give us money, then we'll take that too. So so thank you very much for watching. And you can find these on fieldgoals.com and SeahawksDraftBlocks.com. See you next week.